Welcome to Coffee with Democrats, a sensible platform for progressive conversations. Coffee with Democrats is a grassroots movement dedicated to hearing from Democrats, candidates, legislators, and friends from all political backgrounds who want great conversations. Coffee with Democrats is committed to increase Democrat voter registration and Democrat voter turnout by making voting more exciting and meaningful. And now here's your host of Coffee with Democrats, Kevin Dawson.
Well, good morning. This is going to be an exciting day. Today is Thursday, April 16th. It is now 10 o'clock. It's time to get started with our Coffee with Democrats conversation. We're going to be live today and with online with Secretary of State Adrian Fontes. Good morning, Secretary Fontes.
Morning. How's all my Democrats doing across the globe today?
Well, I can tell you this: we are truly excited to be with you, and it's going to be a great day and a great conversation. I did have a little hoarse throat this morning, so I'm not drinking any coffee. A little bit of lemon juice to try to keep everything clear. You got any favorite coffee that you're trying to drink this morning?
Well, we've got a little local shop, Latina owned on 24th Street in McDowell here in Phoenix called Deseo. I'm also a big fan of a local joint called Joe Bot Coffee, which is owned by a buddy of mine, John Sagasta. I try to stay away from the big chains, support local business. We got to keep that money in our local communities whenever we can.
Absolutely. Our favorite place to go here in Norman is Beanstalk Coffee and Snow. It's a mom and pop shop. They got two places here in Norman. They've got both coffee and they got snow cones for when it gets hot in the summertime. Get the kids out with the moms whenever they want to have their lattes. And it's a fun atmosphere. It's a great place to go. And we encourage people that are in the Norman area, if you would, please go and support, just like Secretary Fontes said, support your local vendors, because they're going to be the ones who really come on and help us, in the long run. The chains, they're great, but I don't know. I agree with you, Secretary. It's a great place to start at your local business. So
yeah, and I think go ahead.
I've got just a little bit of housekeeping for those people who are coming on here, and I'll announce this again in about 10 minutes. But if you would, please go out onto your Twitter Spaces. Up at the top, there's a up arrow. Click on that up arrow and let all of your followers know that you are on this Twitter Space and that we are hosting Secretary of State Adrian Fontes from Arizona. And let's get as many people on here to join us as possible. We are being live streamed today. We're going to be live streamed on Facebook and YouTube on our Coffee with Democrats website. So please assist us in getting this very important message from Secretary Fontes out to the public. So I interrupted you. Do you mind if I call you Adrian, or is that you want me to stick with Secretary?
I was thinking about Grand Imperial something or other, but Adrian works just fine. Thank you so much.
Well, and I love the fact that you've got a sense of humor, and that's something that a lot of people, you've been such a great advocate for democracy, and you've really been what I've been telling everybody. You are part of the foundation for 2018 and 2020 in helping hold up the house of democracy. You've almost like Hercules, you're holding up the house of democracy virtually by yourself. But you've got a lot of help. There's no doubt. But you've been on MSNBC, CNN. You've been all over the place talking about the activities going on down there in Arizona. And for one, a person in deep red Oklahoma, I love what you're doing, and I'm excited to be here and have a pretty in-depth conversation with you today.
Great. Well,
So,
look, I got to tell you one thing. The Hercules reference is great. I have been working out a little bit, but not that much. And all of this is a team effort. I mean, that's the nature of democracy. It's bringing folks together to make decisions, and then to move on with our regular lives. And if we can't do that intelligently and following the rules of law, and then culminating in peaceful transitions of power, then what the heck are we doing this for? So I'm excited to be part of a much bigger team across the country, particularly here in Arizona. And yeah, I'm excited to be with you today. So let's dig in.
all right. Well, let's talk a little bit about Adrian Fontes. I mean, you're a native of Arizona. From what I understood, you grew up there in Arizona. Can you tell us a little bit about, your upbringing? We'll get into kind of a biographical narrative here.
Yeah, and thanks for that chance. I grew up in a family that has been down in the Sonoran Desert, which crosses the border from just south of Phoenix all the way down into Hermosillo and further into Mexico. My family's been in this desert for a very long time. In fact, I have an ancestor that heard mass given by a Spanish missionary by the name of Father Kino in 1695. And we were here well before that. I've got a lot of history in this region. Before Mexico was Mexico, and before Arizona was even a territory, we've been around for a minute, and so I hold this place very, very close to my heart, and I'm excited to be carrying on, the legacy of my family of service. I've got ancestors that were in the Spanish cavalry. They may not have been too kind to folks out here back in those days, but we're not going to shy away from our history. We're going to use it to inform our future. I have some folks in my past who were merchants, businessmen and women, had a really good time. And then growing up in Nogales, right on the border, I used to take $5 and go get my hair cut in Nogales, Sonora, Mexico, from Nogales, Arizona, the town that I grew up in, down in Santa Cruz County. And it was not a big deal. It was basically a chain link fence with a little barbed wire on top back in the day. And we got along very, very well with our neighbors south of that new border. And I'm just excited to be from a place where there was a lot of commerce back and forth over that port of entry. We had families that spoke Lebanese and Korean and Greek and a whole bunch of different languages. So for being a small town on the border, it was pretty cosmopolitan. We got exposed to a lot. And then I went to high school and ended up at Arizona State University. Go Sun Devils if there's anybody listening. And the rest, as they say, is sort of history.
Well, we kind of skimmed over high school. Were you active in high school sports? Were you debate, or what was kind of your there's a point right here that I think is an inflection point where you go from being a young boy to being a man that goes into the Marine Corps. And I was just kind of curious if there was some connection there that actually drove you through that, maybe through sports.
Well, I was in sports starting very young. I played soccer. Everybody plays soccer down in Southern Arizona, even back in the 70s and early 80s. And I was in organized sports, played varsity basketball at Nogales High School for Ray Moletta, great coach who's got a couple of state championships under his belt. But it wasn't until I left high school. Yes, I was involved in a lot of clubs and organizations when I was in high school. It was a small town, so there wasn't a hell of a lot to do. But we would, after high school, I went to Arizona State, and interestingly, and I'm not afraid to admit it because I lost my scholarship. I had a full ride scholarship to ASU, and I just partied too much, like a lot of Sun Devils do, and I ended up a counselor at a private high school in Cornville, Arizona, the Oak Creek Ranch School, and I decided I needed to go back. I decided I had to finish my education, and the one way to do it would be to enlist in the armed forces. But at the time, I hadn't been dead set on the Marine Corps. In fact, that was a bit of happenstance. My recruiter, Master Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez in Prescott, Arizona, because I was up in North Central Arizona at that time. He was the only guy that was there in that little strip mall office in Prescott, Arizona, where they have the 4 different services at the time. with their offices, and he was standing outside the open door, and I had walked towards the Army or the Air Force office, and there he is standing there in his dress blues, and he says, "You here to see these guys?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "Well, they're out to lunch." And I said, "Okay." And he says, "Why do you want to get in?" And I said, "Well, I got to finish my education, and this is a good way to do it." And he says, "Well," he says, "you can be in the Army, you can be in the Air Force, you can be in the Navy, but you'll never be a Marine." And boy, he caught me hook, line, and sinker with that thing. And a couple months later, my feet were on the yellow footprints at MCRD San Diego, California, and then the rest is history.
Right.
So
Well,
that was the moment that he sold me, and I've never looked back since. I'm really, really proud of the work that I did in the Marine Corps. I wasn't just an admin guy, but I was a marksmanship instructor and a classified materials controller. Interestingly, I was the election officer for my squadron.
how poignant.
Yeah, I really hadn't even remembered that until not too long ago when I was looking back at some old records, and I had taken that course. But then after my time in the service, I got, selected for a meritorious commission, broke both of my feet actually, in Quantico, Virginia. I was pulled out of the enlisted ranks to become an officer. Didn't get to finish at Quantico, came back, finished my undergraduate degree with honors at Arizona State University, and then came to the University of Denver to get my Juris Doctorate.
And you're talking about Denver, Colorado?
Yeah. I was
Okay.
at the Sturm College of Law there. I got an emphasis in international law. And it was funny. I came to law school hoping to do international water law. I did a lot of environmental stuff, and I caught the criminal law bug while I was in law school. And so I ended up being a prosecutor at the Adams County and then the Denver County DA after law school, and came back to the Maricopa County Attorney's Office here in Arizona in Phoenix, and ended up being in charge of the International Prosecution Unit for the Arizona Attorney General's Office. And that was a lot of fun. Got to do a lot of traveling internationally, chasing fugitives back and forth over the border where I grew up.
Right.
So it kind of came full circle.
Can we back up just a little bit? You mentioned something there that caught me, and I don't understand the term. You said you broke your feet.
Oh, yeah. Well, like I said, I got selected for a meritorious commission out of the enlisted ranks, and I was in Quantico, Virginia in the winter of 95, 96, which, if folks remember, was one of the coldest winters they'd had in hundreds of years. And I don't know what happened. I got stress fractures in both of my feet. The big bone down to my big toe
Right.
on both feet cracked, essentially. And I guess walking on ice is a little different than walking around in the desert, which was what I was used to. And I just couldn't finish. And in the Marine Corps, if you can't stand, you can't walk. If you can't walk, you can't run. And if you can't run, you cannot be an officer of Marines.
Sure.
And so that broke my heart. But it was an interesting moment, because what I hadn't understood right when that happened, my father had been admitted to Tucson Medical Center back here in Arizona. I was in Virginia at the hospital, at the Naval Hospital in Bethesda, Maryland. He'd been admitted with a second bout of Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is a viral disease that attacks the nerve synapses. Most people don't survive the first round. Back in the day, he got it in the 70s. Well, he got it a second time. And so instead of flying from Maryland back to Denver and then to Yuma, I flew from Maryland to Denver to Tucson. And the medical staff actually had me sitting by his bed for a couple of days. They didn't ever admit me, but they fed me and let me shower there, and because I couldn't walk anyway. So I just hung out with my dad while he had tubes in and out of his neck getting his oil changed. Yeah. So, but he survived. He's still kicking around. He's 80 or pushing 80 or something like that. He's an old guy now. So, but I'm sure glad that I had those moments with him, because we almost lost him a second time.
Yeah, that's horrible. That anytime you've got a parent that is suffering, you suffer with them, and I can completely empathize. I want to go back to a little bit of what you talked about during your Marine Corps. You were an instructor, arms instructor, and because this is going to be relevant later on in our conversation, because we're going to delve pretty deep into the Second Amendment later on. But so talking about some of your activities as as an instructor, what were some of your favorite weapons in um, in trying to explain to people your experiences in handling all of these different weapons and what it took in order to become a weapons instructor?
Well, I was a basic marksmanship instructor, BMI, out on the rifle range in Yuma. So I didn't get any, I didn't get a lot of detailed training in a lot of the other weaponry. We didn't get too deep into any of the platforms more than the M60, which is a larger machine gun. So we didn't deal with any of the grenade launchers, although we had, Marines train with all of those weapons. So we periodically trained. I didn't learn how to train folks on any of those platforms, is what I'm saying. What I did learn how to train Marines on was your basic 9mm pistol and the M16A2 service rifle, which was the qualifying weapon for enlisted Marines and Marines up through the rank of captain. Once you become a major, all you need to do is be qualified with a sidearm. And so I spent a lot of time in 2 week stints. First week was basically snapping in, where we did a lot of where we would teach Marines how to and really kind of bend their body around the rifle, so that they could have a really solid platform, stable platform from which to fire the weapon. And then the second week was 4 days plus one on the range. You could declare your fourth day, Thursday, as your qualifying day if you wanted to. And really, it was a lot of coaching, because everybody goes through the basic rifle stuff in boot camp, but those 2 weeks are designed to get you, painfully familiar with this particular weapon system, which is just like the AR-15, but for the burst and auto trigger settings. For fundamentally the same thing. So that's really what we did.
When you talk about burst, that's the 3-round shot.
Yeah, there's a trigger. A lot of folks are familiar with a safety button or safety knob on different firearms. The M16A2 service rifle has a 4-setting safety. On the trigger, you really have single shot burst, which is it's a 3-round burst, and then the auto, which it's really discouraged that you use that because with this particular weapon system, the barrel heats up pretty quickly,
Right.
and you don't want to do too much of that because you'll bend up your barrel.
So to wind up our conversation about that, how long from the time that a Marine would start their training to the time that they ended their training, how long would that person have to go through that process? And then how often would they have to go through re-instruction or additional training?
Well, all Marines have to go through a field section of boot camp or basic school if you're an officer. That includes a lot of time on the rifle range, and I will say weeks, and that's plural. Then at the basic school or Marine combat training, which is the segment that you go to after boot camp, that's out in the field, you'd fire a lot of different weapon systems, and you spend a lot of time on the rifle range. Then once you go through your technical school, whether you're going to be an airplane mechanic or a truck driver, or deal with munitions, or deal with supply chain logistics, whatever, after that you get out into the fleet or into the wing, and every year you've got to qualify with rifle, and that qualification lasts a little over a week and a half. So it's essentially 2 weeks every single year. You've got to qualify again. So in a 4-year career, a Marine is going to spend, let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8, so 2 months, probably something in the range of 3.5 to 4 months total time in those 4 years. So it's a chunk of time out there training with that weapon system.
So I'm going to change directions on us just a little bit. I want to leave that one because we're going to come back to that later on. But you went on to work with district attorneys' offices, and this is going to lead us to our next group of questions that we have. But talk to us a little bit about all the different places where you worked within the district attorney's offices.
So I started in law school as an intern with the Adams County DA's office in Brighton, Colorado. I worked for a guy named Bob Grant, the elected DA up there in Adams County. And then I got poached down by Bill Ritter, who was the Denver DA at the time. He ended up becoming the governor of Colorado. Great guy. Bill taught me some really, really strong leadership lessons that I carry with me to this day. I have a lot of respect and admiration for that guy. And then I came down, my wife at the time and I decided we wanted to start having kids and raise them near family. So we moved back to Arizona and I worked for Rick Romley, the Maricopa County attorney, who is a district attorney level prosecutor. They do felony trials and stuff like that. And from that office, I moved then to the Arizona Attorney General's office under former Attorney General Terry Goddard. And they brought me over there because of my language proficiency in Spanish and because of my cultural proficiency along the border to be able to relate well with law enforcement and local officials up across the international line down there. So that was sort of my hop, skip, and jump through some of that stuff. And then, I decided to I decided once my then wife was pregnant, we were getting ready to have our first kid. I said, you know what, I love prosecuting work, but got to make some money. So I dipped out into the private sector.
And but again, it's from your experiences working within the government, the state agencies, that at some point in 2016, 2017, you started thinking about becoming the Maricopa County Recorder. Can you talk to us a little bit about, the influence that caused you to want to do that?
Yeah, that wasn't really start thinking about kind of a thing. There wasn't a hell of a lot of contemplation there. It was all started, and I had been a little bit involved with the Democratic Party at the legislative district level here in Central Phoenix. As a matter of fact, current Governor Katie Hobbs here in Arizona was my legislator. She was my state senator at the time. Senator Kirsten Sinema was a representative at the time for that district, and in fact, Congressman Ruben Gallego also came out of that same area in downtown Phoenix. But I was just kind of involved with the party back and forth. I ended up becoming the state party's affirmative action director for 2016. And moving into January and February of 2016, we started working on making sure that Arizona would have a very diverse delegation to the national convention. And it was a heated race. I think folks remember that was the race where both sides had a ton of candidates, as I recall. And so we were working hard. And then I took a trip with my mom to Greece. We spent about 10 days in Athens, just the two of us. It was a wonderful trip. I was a big Hellenophile when I was a kid, the Greek mythology and all that sort of stuff, and birthplace of democracy. And when I got back on March 22nd, 2016, it was, or March 21st, we got back. I can't remember the exact date, but the next day was the presidential preference election here in Arizona. That's our primary. And we had like 4 and 5 hour long lines to vote. People just could not vote. And I was just disgusted. And so late that evening, I got with some friends, some folks from the Communication Workers of America, labor union, for those of you who aren't familiar. And they said, we got to have a strong voice pushing against this system that just isn't letting people vote. They had gone from 400 to 200 to 60 voting locations for that race in the last 3 presidential cycles. Think about that. They went from 400 down to 200, and then in 2016 they went down to 60, and it was just a disaster. So I ran, but here's the thing: I ran against the godmother of the Maricopa County Republican Party. Her husband, who had passed away years ago, may he rest in peace, was the biggest fundraiser that Maricopa County Republicans had ever had. She had shepherded generations of Republican politicians through the system. Her name is Helen Purcell. And nobody thought I could beat her. I didn't think I could beat her, but we ran because I knew that we had to have the conversation. And being a process guy, that's where you have the conversation during political campaigns, right? That's when people are paying attention. And so we had that conversation. And it was, a typical American political battle. It got a little rough, which is perfectly okay. And I won. And I caught the car, as they say, and I felt like Robert Redford at the end of the candidate. Like, what do I do now? I made myself an election administrator to the election in Auburn, Georgia, and I got CERA certified, which is Certified Election and Registration Administrator. It's a nationally recognized professional certification. I learned from the best. I didn't fire anybody because we had so much experience in that office. I just basically asked them, what do you guys need to improve this thing? And so we spent the next 4 years in January of 2017 all the way through the 2020 election, really improving the systems here, bringing record numbers of voters to the ballot box, opening access to traditionally underserved communities, communicating with folks by creating, like the ballot tracking system. Most of Arizona's voters vote by mail. And now they can sign up and they get a text message when their ballot is coming to them in the mail. So they watch out for it. When their ballot gets back to the election department, so they'll know it was received. And then they get another text message when the signature is verified and it goes for tabulation. That's one of the flagship systems that we put into place here. I'm very proud of it. We're doing it statewide now in Arizona. So that was sort of what ended up happening. And the impetus, though, was not very much a lot of contemplation, as my former spouse would sometimes say. I jumped in because I knew there was a problem and I felt like, someone's got to fix it. Why not me?
Right. And it's kind of, you're talking about all these systems that will help people register and help people vote. And it's systems that we see in these red states like Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri, Tennessee, Kentucky. We're seeing all of these mechanisms that you put into place in Arizona, and we always look at them as aspirational because they were so groundbreaking, and they meant so much to the outcome of elections and getting participation. And that's the number one goal of anybody, is to get more participation in the election process. But we're being, the red has got their thumb right on the top of us and holding us down and suppressing all of that because they don't want any of that. They want to keep the minimum numbers out there because they know the lower the numbers are, the less likely it is that Democrats will have an opportunity to win.
Well, and let me jump in right there, because that's traditionally been one of the ways that this whole thing plays out, right, in the political landscape. The more people that vote, the more Democrats win. The less people that vote, the less Democrats win. That's a really bizarre metric to me, because what it does is it speaks to the notion that somehow, some way, Republicans have gotten their voters more disciplined into actually voting. Somehow, some way, the Republican Party, and this is a self-criticism, this is Democrats writ large across the United States of America. Why in the world are their voters seemingly more disciplined? Why in the world are their voters seemingly more motivated to vote? What is it that we're doing wrong? Right? We can criticize these systems. We can say, well, if we open access, we win. Well, okay, that may be true, and that may be a symptom. But the disease is the fact that we somehow, some way, have to figure out how we can get Democratic-leaning voters to vote in every election, in every cycle, local elections, school district elections, off-cycle elections. We've got to figure that out. That's the responsibility of Democrats. So, when I see and hear this notion that, the more people that vote, the more Democrats win, that may very well be true, but that's only a reflection of, the big candidate at the top of the ticket in a presidential cycle. That's nonsense.
Right.
If we're going to be a political power, if we're actually going to do what's good for citizens, we've got to do the day-to-day work that Democrats have not traditionally done, as evidenced by the notion that you've put on the table. And that is, we fail to turn out our voters regularly. And shame on us for that. Why in the world is it that lower turnout automatically means that the natural assumption is, and it's true, that Republicans win? How in the world can we sit here and watch this happen cycle after cycle and not get out there and start registering voters immediately, and not get out there and educate our base immediately? Like, there's got to be something that Democrats across the country can do to stop this nonsensical sort of, what is it when you do the same thing over and over again? This insanity.
Right.
of just depending on big turnout elections. We've got to win on the bottom of the ballot. We've got to win in the state houses. We've got to win in the school districts. We've got to win in the county commissioner races. But to do that, we've got to turn out our base every single election. And that's what gets me fired up is we've got sort of this acquiescence to this status quo. And that's insanity to me.
Well, that you really drove home the point that I was trying to make. And I really, I can't thank you enough, because that was exactly what I was hoping that we would hear from you, because that is exactly why we got started with Coffee with Democrats, is to just get into the ditches, into the mud with everybody and start talking with people about, be excited about the vote. Get excited. This is something that you can't give up on. We need to change directions to another topic. But before we go there, let's talk a little bit about your activities during the 2018 election, because you really, when I talked earlier about you were the Hercules, you were the person that was holding up the foundation of a democracy. 2018 was a trial and fire for you. And it was, you went through a lot. So can you talk to us a little bit about your activities in 2018? The attack by Alex Jones, the conspiracy theorists, and having to have your go bags and things like that.
Oh, you're talking about 2020.
Okay.
Yeah, because Alex Jones was just a blip on the radar in 2018, but the 2020 election was 2018 we had our issues as well. There's no election in Maricopa County that goes perfectly smoothly. It's just, it's the second largest jurisdiction in the United States of America, and it is politically tight. And so that's why we have so much scrutiny. Nobody cares that California doesn't call their elections formally until 3 or 4 weeks after election day, because they know what the turnout's going to be. But here in Arizona, because we're competitive, folks scrutinize us. And in 2020, all eyes were on Arizona. Fox News had called the election for Trump early here in Arizona, and that raised the ire of a whole bunch of folks, particularly in the incumbent camp for Donald Trump. And we ended up having to lock down our warehouse. We did have Alex Jones and the Q Shaman basically arm in arm right outside of our doors, flanked by many protesters with long rifles. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm a little familiar with the capacity of those weapons. And so I was worried. I was genuinely worried for my staff. We did have one incident where a group of the protesters actually grabbed one of my staff members out of the lobby. And that staff member had to be brought back in by judicial security and some of the sheriff's folks who were there, and then locked the doors behind them, basically barring the doors behind them. In fact, the security circumstance there at the warehouse was so tough. We actually had a SWAT team stationed inside of the warehouse where the ballots were being held in case there was a breach of the perimeter. And it should shock the conscience that I'm talking about of the most civilian activity in military terms. That should be absolutely shocking to folks. And it was to us, because this was the first time we'd ever been in that sort of a situation here, or just about anywhere, as I recall. And we're still in mid-November of 2020 at this point, but it got worse. We had, during that time, we had a lot of threats against myself and my family. I had to have my co-parent take the kids out of the house and take them over to my ex-mother-in-law's house for several days. We had some bags ready for them to grab and go if there was ever an emergency that needed to happen. They had a couple of different plans. We had several people out of town who were ready to take and keep them for a while. It was pretty bad. And there's no family in the world that should have to prepare for that stuff, much less go through that stuff. But, the reality is this. It's not like we got, it's democracy is worth it. And it sounds so weird for a parent to say that. And it's not because I want my kids to have to deal with that sort of stress. It's not because I want my family to be under threat, but quite the opposite. I want this democracy to thrive so that other families don't have to suffer this sort of stuff. I want the rule of law to succeed so that no other families have to suffer through this sort of stuff. But sadly, they have. We've lost in 10 of our 15 counties here in Arizona. Right now, in the last something like 16 months, we've lost senior election officials in 10 of our 15 counties. Just last week,
Right.
we lost two in one rural county. And that's because of threats and intimidation. It's because folks are just getting sick and tired of the nonsense. And that's why I've been such a strong advocate working with the Brennan Center for Justice, working with a lot of other organizations, going to Washington, D.C., talking to Senator Klobuchar on the Rules Committee, talking to other folks in the delegations, trying to increase federal and state penalties for folks who would threaten or harass elections officials, working on budgets across the state, particularly mine, to increase our security profile and to kind of nail down a lot of our systems to make them stronger against foreign and non-foreign actors who would come at us. It's not just personal or personnel security. We're talking about information technology systems and communication networks and so forth. So the whole thing has been a heck of an adventure, and I rely a lot on my prior training and prior relationships to make sure that we're being well informed as we move forward through the landscape.
So, we went from Arizona being the land of McCain to this clown show of Kerry Lake. It just seems like this dichotomy of forces that were in place out there. And, you talked about the peaceful transfer of power, and we're a year and a half away from the last election, and Kerry Lake still doesn't want to, or, she does, it wasn't a half, it's only been since November, but she doesn't want to give up. She doesn't want to quit that. She's still putting out there that she's going to be the governor by some, tremendous force that nobody knows what's going on. But I digress. Well, let's talk more about you were running for election during 2020 as well.
Yeah, I was on the same ballot as Donald Trump in 2016 and in 2020. And in 2016, I won like he did. And in 2020, I lost like he did. But, I didn't complain about it. I got up and I ran again and I won. So I've got that on him. But yeah, it was very difficult because we weren't just dealing with, I wasn't just dealing with the life of a candidate running in a running in a county race that's as big as many state races. Right. I wasn't just running the election where I was a candidate on the ballot, right? Having to be remote because I couldn't be near where any of the live ballots were. That just wouldn't have been right. So I wasn't even at the warehouse where all the action was happening. I had to manage things remotely. But it was also right in the middle of the pandemic. I mean, we forget sometimes how long the summer of 2020 was. And our problem was that our presidential preference election in 2020 was on March 17th. That was right when the lockdowns started happening. That was at the peak of the paranoia, legitimately so, I think. We didn't know what was going on, and people didn't want to leave their houses. People didn't, we were sealing up the windows, and it was just crazy. And so imagine having to run an election where all of your polling, we were getting ready to do 720 something polling locations at schools and churches, community centers, and all this stuff. And then suddenly, 3/4 of them say, nope, global pandemic, find somewhere to put your voters. And so we had to actually completely change the nature of that election from a precinct-based polling place election for that presidential preference in 2020, where you go to your assigned polling place, into what's called a vote center model, where anyone can vote anywhere inside of the county. And so we had to quickly build partnerships with our professional sports teams, with all of the spring training stadiums that we've got across Maricopa County and the Metro Phoenix area, with the colleges and universities here, Arizona State University, Grand Canyon University, and a lot of the other schools that had large spaces, with a lot of the shopping centers that had closed because of the pandemic. We said, fine, if there's a closed, Sears store that you're not using, or an old Dillard's or something, let us use the space, right? There's parking. There's a giant warehouse size space that we can safely distance the voting booths and the check-in booths. And, and the problem was more about 2 weeks before the actual election day, we had all of this personal protective gear coming in for the much larger election, and California declared an emergency. So all of our personal protective gear and supplies got diverted en route. We literally had semi trucks that were heading towards Phoenix for us to distribute stuff, and they got shifted over to California. So we had to scramble, and I give all of the kudos to the team down at Maricopa County Elections Department, the County Board of Supervisors at the time, and all of the folks that we worked with so hard in the communities across the board. Everybody came through to make the election work. So we got through the presidential preference and the primary and the general under all of these pressures. On top of it, there were all the threats. Right. So it was kind of, for me personally, it was a very, very challenging time period. You've got the pandemic and all of the stuff that every single one of us was dealing with there. I'm a candidate on the ballot at the same time running the election itself. And we've got these extra threats coming in that really nobody had ever seen. So it was a very, very challenging time. And, this isn't a tale of woe is me. It's a tale of, man, I had a great team behind me. And I'm super proud of the support that I had and the people that actually helped us make it happen.
So I've got a question that I need to ask you. We're running a little bit long. Do you have to go immediately at the top of the hour, or can you stick with us just a little bit longer?
I may have a harder stop, but I think I've got, as I can see, one staff person listening. Okay. So if they need me, they can come in and grab me. I'm in the conference room right now. So.
Okay. The reason I asked that is we've run a little bit long, and I still have more topics that I need to talk to you about. We're 10 minutes past where I wanted to talk about your election to Secretary of State, and then
let's rock and roll. I'll make my answers shorter.
Okay. So you made it through the 2020 election. You lost the election, unfortunately, but then in 22 you ran for Secretary of State. Between time, you were working as an advocate for the Democratic Party, working with different organizations to help secure, the voting processes with the Secretary of State. And then you actually ran. Who was your opponent for the Secretary of State?
Well, actually, when I left the county recorder's office in the end of December of 2020, I went down to Tucson to be the chief deputy recorder for the new county recorder in Pima County, Gabriela Cáceres Kelly, for her transition into office. We brought a lot of our programs down there and set her up with a good foundation. She's doing a great job down there. And then basically I moved into a little bit of that advocacy work that you talked about. But we had to get through a primary first. My primary opponent was the majority leader in the House of Representatives here in Arizona. I'm sorry, the minority leader in the House of Representatives here in Arizona. He'd been in the legislature for, 11 years or something like that. And they outraised us almost 5-1. They had a lot of community organizations and folks behind them. But we beat them. We beat them because we had a solid Arizona story. He wasn't born here. He wasn't raised here. And as a matter of fact, for the first time in Arizona history, as an aside, we've got a governor, a secretary of state, and an attorney general who are all native Arizonans. That's the first time it's happened since statehood. The governor was born in Tempe. I was born in Nogales, and Attorney General Mays was born in Prescott. So we're very proud of that. But after the primary, we ended up facing off against a guy named Mark Fincham. And he was pretty much the king goofball of election deniers, or I should say fascists. Sorry, I want to be more correct. Across the United States of America. He was that cowboy hat wearing wacko who is still out there whining and complaining about stuff. And, just absolutely bonkers ideas about the elections and election workers and conspiracy theories. And, he really offended a lot of people. The fact that he was an oath keeper and is an anti-Semite didn't help him. And what happened was we built a coalition with the business community, a lot of Republicans, a lot of people who just hate the idea that Arizona has already suffered through, the Evan Meacham impeachment in the late 80s, the Martin Luther King holiday scandals in the early 90s, SB 1070 in the aughts, and then all of the other stuff that we dealt with, our marriage equality fight. And it's always been the business community that comes out and says, we cannot have crazy. We need stability. We need reasonableness. We need folks that we can at least sit down and work with. I presented that option to them, and I think that was one of the main reasons why we did so well. The only statewide Democrat that got more votes than I did was Senator Mark Kelly, and
Right.
and I'm proud to say, but I'm proud for my team to say that I even beat him here in Maricopa County, where we've got 2/3 of the voters.
Right.
So we did very, very well in my campaign because we built that broad coalition, that broad multi-party coalition, to bring people to the table for the better of the entire state. It wasn't a political campaign. It was a campaign for the state. And I'm very, very proud of the work we did and the win that we took.
But in the outcome, you became Secretary of State, the very first Democrat to hold the Secretary of State position in 50 years. The last Democrat that held was back in 1923. And you are now the 21st Secretary of State for the state of Arizona. What an accomplishment.
I'm the first. Well, I'm the second Latino to be elected statewide in Arizona. Right. Katie Hobbs was our Secretary of State before she became governor. So we've had a Democrat here and there in this office. Rose Mofford, famously, who also became governor, came out of this office. But I'm the first Latino to be elected statewide in almost 50 years. Raul Castro was the previous one. He was elected governor back in the late 70s. And I was the first Democrat to be elected countywide in Maricopa County in a long time, and the first Latino. So we've got some firsts that are happening, but look, this is just evidence of the fact that Arizona is changing. The demographics are shifting, the politics are shifting. We truly are a competitive state, and I'll tell you this, especially to all your listeners from outside of Arizona, a little bit of investment goes a really long way in this state. We only raised $4 million in our general campaign statewide. And we crushed it. We did an amazing job, and we did have some other help. I've come to learn from outside groups, but the bottom line is we ran a good, solid race on our values, and people have come to understand that Democrats mean business, and we want to make sure that folks see that we can govern. Right? We may not be the sexiest campaigners. We may not be, those folks that are going to draw a lot of attention on cable news. But at the end of the day, we're the serious folks, and people with vested interests in the outcomes of elections, that want stability, that want good opportunities for their businesses, for their communities, for their educational institutions. They want folks that are reasonable. They want folks that are going to be intelligent and smart about their decision making. And so that's what we presented. And Arizona's got a lot of that in the Democratic Party here. And I just think that folks across the country should pay close attention, because we're going to be making some big, big moves in 2024.
So I got two things to add to what you just talked about. A few weeks ago, Chief Jim Gray from the Osage tribe, he left out of Oklahoma. He went to Arizona to help with the Native American vote. And that outcome speaks for itself, that it really went up in Arizona. And then the second part of that was, we had such a big election here with Joy Hoffmeister running against Kevin Stitt as governor. And Governor Stitt was falling behind in all of the polling. And Ted Cruz was supposed to go to Arizona and spend a lot of time in Arizona. He had to come to Oklahoma to help in this governor's fight. We lost the governor's fight to Governor Stitt, but in doing so, it freed up resources that would not have been, that did not get spent in Arizona. So we feel like in some way in Oklahoma, that we somehow, helped Arizona with becoming more democratic. And that just, we can't prove it, but it's just something that we kind of put a feather in our hat.
Well, I'll tell you what, I will say that whether or not you can prove it, we appreciate any of the support here in the Grand Canyon State. And look, Arizona's been looking at a significant shift for a long time. If you look at John McCain's wins over the last couple decades, they've been narrower and narrower and narrower every single time. And every Senate race has seen that narrowing. So you look at that, you look at the statewide races. This has been a long time coming, and there's been a ton of work done on the ground. Before I showed up on the political scene, and then now that I'm here, I'm helping to push the agenda forward. Look, Democrats' values are aligned much more solidly with most of our voters. In fact, the vast majority of our voters. When we talk issue by issue in Arizona about what we believe in, how we believe things ought to move forward, what is good for our economy and our families, people align with Democrats far more than they align with Republicans. The problem is, and I'll go back to the self-criticism that I launched a little while ago, we're just not selling it right.
Right.
We haven't been selling it right for a long time. And one of the things that I get criticized for sometimes is just being too blunt and just being too honest and just being too direct. Well, guess what? Folks out there they know fascism when they see it. And if the fascists don't want to be called fascists, they need to stop acting like fascists.
Yes, exactly.
And we got to take the same attitude when it comes to our neighborhood schools and how woefully underfunded they are, and how that was the system that really built America. Those neighborhood schools that educated kids and shared opportunities across economic zip codes. Being able to not get bankrupted because you had a health emergency. Having the days where our public educators, for example, was respected so much that a science teacher could raise a family of 4 on that one science teacher's salary and still have money for a house and a car and 2 weeks vacation. That's the kind of budget priorities. That's the kind of respect that Democrats have that most people still do believe in and still do want. But we worry so much, and this is going to get me in trouble with some of your listeners. We're so damn worried about people's feelings
yes,
that we forget about the greater good, because there's 1 or 2 people in the room that might get a little bit offended by this or a little bit offended by that. Well, look, I'm not responsible for other people's feelings. I'm responsible for the health, safety, and well-being of the entire state of Arizona where it applies to my office, particularly the well-run elections that we need to continue to uphold and support. And so, yeah, people sometimes get their feelings hurt when I'm, as direct as I am. But at the end of the day, they know I'm going to get the job done. They know I'm going to build a solid team of people who are going to push our agenda forward, who are going to get wins for us on the political side and have the most fair and the most accountable elections that we can produce. I'm very proud of the work that I'm doing, and I'm very proud of the work that all of my teams have done.
Well, and thank you for that. And we're going to change directions again. We're going to start talking a little bit about the Second Amendment and your activism toward the Second Amendment. On the show with us today is Steve Holcomb. He's a co-founder of Coffee with Democrats. He has a question about guns and guns rights, and we're going to get into that a little bit. So, Steve, if you have a question, you want to go ahead and ask that.
Well, Adrian, thank you so much for coming on here. And I really just want to not say very much because we don't have much time left. I'll just add that I'm a former prosecutor. I'm an attorney myself. Your pathway really resonates with me tremendously. And I want to highlight this YouTube video that you did last July, I believe, that emphasizes very passionately that a well-regulated militia doesn't mean you get to just go out and buy a gun and pretend like you're, we the people in a militia. And that you are getting this gun to protect yourself against black helicopters or whatever. That you are a member of the government, essentially, at the direction of the government when you're part of a well-regulated militia. And we've gotten away from that. And if you would like to, I would love to hear you speak to that further. And I would encourage folks to go up on YouTube and see this video, which I think is just a couple of minutes long.
Yeah, well, first, it doesn't make any sense if you believe in order, if you believe in the constitutional order and the Constitution, you must believe in the rule of law. Why in the world would you take up arms against the government that is the representation or the mechanism through which the rule of law is executed. So in the first place, the notion that the Second Amendment is there so that you can take up arms against the government on its face is a logical impossibility, right? And so there's that. Number two, the idea of the word militia, if you go to, and if you're taking notes, here's the time to pick up your pen. If you go to Article 1, Section 8, subparagraphs 15 and 16 in the Constitution, militia is very clearly defined. Who arms the militia, which means who buys the weapons, who regulates the militia, what kind of regulations, who appoints the officers. You know, all of this sort of stuff is defined very, very clearly in there. So any debate about I get to be my own militia is just, it's an impossibility, because the notion of militia is defined and the purpose for the militia is also defined in that first subparagraph. So I just don't see any plain reading of the Constitution and its amendments, which include the Second Amendment. I don't see any plain reading giving you either a logical possibility or a textual possibility for the arguments that these, you know, gun fetishists would come out with. That being said, it has been so well sold, this notion that this idol worship of firearms and the armed citizen, that we're already in a place where, you know, it's going to take a heck of a lot of time and energy to come back from it. Because look, if a whole bunch of slaughtered kids in a classroom isn't enough to convince them that they're wrong, well, what is? Like what?
Right.
Like what is? And that to me is that, like, that's well, it's the price of freedom. Well, that's a hell of an audacious position to take when you got dead kids. That's terrible.
Right. Right. Yeah, we couldn't agree with you more. And it's such a a sad commentary about where we are today, because if I remember right, my history, the first George Bush, working with a bipartisan group in Congress, passed one of the most sweeping gun control legislations, through the Republican-led Congress. So, it's kind of flip-flopped in the last 40 years from where it was in the early 90s, or 30 years ago. But anyway, it's so such a sad place. And where is Arizona at with red flag laws?
Well, I could say we're working on them, but I don't necessarily think that would be a completely true place to be. At the end of the day, we still have a one-seat Republican majority in our state House and our state Senate. Thankfully, Governor Hobbs has taken the ninth floor and is vetoing a bunch of the more radical stuff that's happening in the legislature. So we've got a stopgap now. But we've got a lot of room to make up. And truth be told, this isn't just a state issue. This is a federal issue as well. This is all hands on deck across the board. And I think the notion of, the states being the final arbiters doesn't make a ton of sense. You've got these weapons of war traversing interstate commerce, and they go from here to there. I mean, most of the weapons used in all the violence in Chicago come from outside of Illinois.
Exactly.
Most of the weapons used in California come from outside of California. Most of the weapons used in New York come from outside of New York. Hell, most of the weapons used in Mexico come from outside of Mexico. A lot of them come from right here in Arizona. Right. So, where are we? We're not anywhere close. And we're not anywhere close because, for some strange reason, one particular lobby has an absolute stranglehold on the sensibility of one of our political parties, and that's just a tragedy, And I don't know what it's going to take, but we're willing to join in that effort and make the work happen.
Well, I believe that where the work happens is in the trenches within the Democratic Party, getting out the vote, increasing registrations, making voting exciting, and having a cause to vote. And this is one of those bellwether moments for citizens in the United States to become active. Don't sit back and wait for somebody else to make the decision for you. Don't surrender your rights to somebody else. Pick up the voting card, fill out your name and go vote, because it really matters. Every single person votes. So we just had um, uh, a gentleman from Colorado who ran against Lorraine Boebert and Adam Frisch, and he only lost by 540 votes. If we can't focus on the fact that every single vote counts, if one person in every precinct in Colorado would just change their vote or increase by one person in every precinct, he would have won. So the fact is, we've got to be excited about voting, and we've got to be excited about coming into the voting booth and knowing that we're going to make a difference.
And let me make a quick interjection here on this point, because I think it's salient. This is not a political question.
Sure.
Voting and helping people vote is not a political question. Some of the best voter advocates that I know in Arizona include former Republican county recorders like Virginia Ross, like Leslie Hoffman, like Leslie Poquette down in Yuma County. These Republican voter advocates have been so good. And they taught me a bunch of stuff when I was a county recorder here in Maricopa, because they'd all already been in office for a little while. We cannot treat access to the ballot as a partisan issue. It's not a partisan issue. And there are hard partisans out there that are trying to create partisan divides when it comes to access. If you believe in the Constitution and if you believe in voting rights, you cannot believe that making it harder for an eligible citizen to vote makes sense. And so access is critically important for everyone, because that's the only way you get a true representation of what the American public wants. And so this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, right? We as Democrats have to do more to get our folks voting all of the time, not just so that we can win, just so that we can win, although that would be a great side benefit, but so that the leadership in this country can have a true representation of what all of the American people are thinking, so that, frankly, the extremists can see that they are extremists, that they are on the margins.
Right.
Because when we get more people voting, it's a logical fallacy to say that the United States of America, even Arizona, is a politically right-wing country or state. When more people vote, it ends up generally center-left. By preventing people from voting, you're preventing the true intent of the public to come forward, and that's just not honest. And that's the problem we've got to face. So we've got to look at this not as a partisan political issue, but as a fundamental rights, fundamentally what's true America issue. And I think if we look at it that way, we might have more success.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, everybody who's come on to this, thank you so much for coming on here and listening. We have had such a wonderful conversation. This has been an outstanding opportunity for us to meet Adrian Fontes, Secretary of State for the state of Arizona. He is such a true patriot for the United States. His service, we've talked about a lot about who he is, but I don't think we've touched but just the tip of the iceberg of who Adrian Fontes really is. So please come back and join us again next week. We're going to have Jess Piper on next week. She is an advocate out of Missouri. She's the dirt road Democrat. We're really looking forward to having that conversation. Man, I tell you what, Secretary Fontes, this has been one of the most outstanding conversations, and I don't want to end it, but I know that you've got a life. You've got to get out and start doing things and get back to work. And the work of the people is so important. We don't want to hold you back. So thank you so much for coming on here and being with us. We had so many topics that we talked about. Your being on the Maricopa Recorder, your work in the AG's office, the Secretary of State, now the Second Amendment. We could go on for a long time talking about that, but thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me, and keep up the great work. And listen, all of America out there, listen carefully. We can do better. We just got to do the work. So let's get out there and make it happen. Thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it. Y'all take care. God bless.
All right. Thank you. Take care. Bye. Well, that has been the conversation that we've had with Adrian, and we are so excited to talk about next week's activities. And I'm putting on here, we're not going to take it by Twisted Sister, because that's exactly how I feel. We're not going to take it anymore. We're going to go out. We're going to make voting exciting. We're going to make people excited about leaving the house and going to the ballot and changing the dynamics within Oklahoma and within the rest of the country. So thank you, everybody, for being on here. Join us again next Thursday. We're going to do this every Thursday. So again, appreciate everybody being on here. Until next Thursday, 10 a.m. Central Time, everybody, good luck and be safe.